Viktor Petrov's fingers moved across the piano keys like they were telling secrets. Fast, precise, powerful. The audience at Royal Albert Hall sat frozen in their red velvet seats, barely breathing. This was the kind of performance people would talk about for years. The kind that made other pianists question their own abilities. When the final note rang out, silence filled the massive hall for 3 full seconds. Then the applause erupted like thunder. 2,000 people rose to their feet at once. Viktor stood, bowed slightly, his expression calm and collected. He had expected this reaction. He always did. At 32 years old, Viktor had already lived what most musicians could only dream about. He had played in every major concert hall across the world. Carnegie Hall in New York, La Scala in Milan, the Sydney Opera House. Each performance had been recorded, analyzed, and praised by critics who struggled to find new words to describe his talent. One reviewer in the Times had written that listening to Viktor play Rachmaninoff was like watching someone speak directly to God. Backstage, his manager pushed through the crowd of admirers and reporters. Viktor accepted their compliments with polite nods, signing programs with a gold pen, posing for photos with wealthy donors. He had done this routine 1,000 times. Smile, nod, thank them graciously, move on to the next person. But inside, Viktor felt nothing special about any of it anymore. Success had become ordinary. Excellence had become expected. His journey to the top had started early. By age 5, he could play Mozart sonatas that made his teachers cry. By age 8, he was performing in competitions across Europe, winning every single one. His parents had been ordinary people, a schoolteacher and an accountant who had no idea where their son's gift had come from. They simply supported him, driving him to lessons, buying better pianos as he outgrew the cheaper ones, watching in amazement as their child became something extraordinary. By 19, Viktor had won the Tchaikovsky competition, the most prestigious piano competition in the world, the youngest winner in its history. The prize money was substantial, but the recognition was worth far more. Record labels fought over him. Concert halls begged him to perform. His calendar filled up 3 years in advance. His technique was flawless. Music professors used recordings of his performances to teach students about perfect timing, ideal dynamics, precise articulation. He could play the most demanding pieces without breaking a sweat. Liszt's La Campanella, which made most pianists nervous, was a warm-up exercise for Viktor. Chopin's etudes, known for destroying the confidence of advanced students, were his light reading. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted in Viktor's mind. He no longer saw other pianists as colleagues or fellow artists. He saw them as inferior. During interviews, he would make subtle comments about their technical limitations. He would listen to recordings by famous performers and point out microscopic errors that no normal listener would ever notice. His assistant once made the mistake of playing a recording by another pianist in the car. And Viktor had spent the entire drive listing everything wrong with the interpretation. His manager loved this attitude. Controversy sold tickets. The image of Viktor as an untouchable genius, someone who existed on a different level than ordinary musicians, became part of his brand. Magazine articles called him the last true virtuoso and the pianist who made others quit. Viktor read these articles and believed every word. He practiced 6 hours every day, not because he needed to improve, but because he refused to let his skills slip even slightly. His practice routine was mechanical, precise, measured. He would run through scales for 30 minutes, then tackle the most difficult passages from upcoming performances, repeating them until they were absolutely perfect. Then he would move on to repertoire, playing complete pieces from memory, never missing a note. People sometimes asked him about the emotional side of music, about playing with feeling, with heart, with soul. Viktor would smile and give them an answer that sounded thoughtful, but ultimately meant nothing. The truth was, he believed emotion in music was for people who lacked technical perfection. If you played the notes correctly, with proper dynamics and timing, the emotion would automatically be there. That's what he told himself. His apartment in Vienna reflected his personality: minimalist, organized, expensive. The centerpiece was a Steinway Model D grand piano worth more than most people's houses. The walls were covered with framed posters from his performances, magazine covers featuring his face, and photographs of him shaking hands with presidents and royalty. His bedroom was sparse, just a bed and a closet full of identical black performance suits. He owned 17 pairs of the same shoes. Victor had few real friends. His schedule made relationships difficult, but honestly, he didn't mind. Most people bored him. They talked about ordinary things, ordinary problems, ordinary lives. He had outgrown ordinary when he was still in elementary school. The few friendships he maintained were with other successful people, mostly conductors and composers who could keep up with his intellectual discussions about music theory. There had been romantic relationships over the years, but none lasted long. His last partner had left 6 months ago, frustrated by Victor's obsession with his career. She had accused him of caring more about his reputation than about real human connection. Victor had let her go without much fight. She was probably right, but he didn't see it as a problem. His piano was his true love. Everything else was a distraction. Money had stopped meaning much to him years ago. He had more than enough. His performance fees were astronomical, and he could charge whatever he wanted because promoters knew his name would sell out any venue. He owned properties in 3 countries. His investment portfolio was managed by experts. He donated to music education programs occasionally, mostly for the positive press. What drove Victor now wasn't money or even fame. It was the need to maintain his position at the absolute top. He needed to be recognized as the best, not just one of the best. Every positive review felt like maintaining the status quo. Every minor criticism felt like a personal attack that needed to be crushed. He had just finished recording his 12th album, a collection of Chopin's complete works. The sessions had gone smoothly, as they always did. He had played through each piece with technical perfection, rarely needing more than one take. The sound engineers had looked at each other in amazement. But Victor had simply expected nothing less from himself. Now, standing backstage in London after another triumphant performance, Victor felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. He had proved his superiority once again. The audience had worshipped him once again. Critics would write glowing reviews once again. And tomorrow he would fly to Berlin for another performance. Then Prague, then Vienna, then back to New York. The same cycle, repeated endlessly. His assistant approached with his coat and a reminder about the flight time. Victor nodded, preparing to leave through the back exit to avoid the remaining crowd. He had perfected the art of the quick escape, knowing exactly when to leave before people could corner him with questions or requests. As he walked toward the exit, Victor had no idea that in less than 24 hours, his entire understanding of music, of himself, and of what it meant to be truly great would be shattered by 32 bars of melody, recorded on a scratchy old file by a woman he had never heard of. The Prague concert hall was smaller than the venues. Victor usually performed in, but it was sold out anyway. His reputation filled seats regardless of the location. He had played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata and several Chopin nocturnes, finishing with a thunderous performance of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody. The Czech audience gave him 4 standing ovations. Backstage, Victor was going through his usual routine, shaking hands, accepting praise, signing programs. His mind was already on the hotel, on the hot shower he would take, on the glass of wine he would drink before bed. Tomorrow he would fly to Vienna. The day after that, Berlin. His life was an endless loop of airports and concert halls. The crowd of admirers was thinning out when Victor noticed an elderly woman standing near the corner of the room. She was small, maybe in her 80s, wearing a dark blue coat that looked decades old. Her hands clutched a worn leather purse. She had been waiting patiently while others pushed forward for autographs and selfies. When the last few people cleared away, she approached slowly. Her hands were shaking. Victor noticed the tremor immediately. He had seen it before in older fans, usually caused by nerves or medical conditions. He prepared his polite smile, ready to sign whatever she wanted and move on. But she didn't hold out a program. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small USB drive, the kind that had been popular 10 years ago, but was now mostly outdated. It was attached to a keychain with a faded photograph of a young woman in 1940s clothing. "Please," the woman said in heavily accented English. "You must listen to this." Victor almost refused. He received gifts from fans constantly. Most of it ended up in the trash. Sheet music with personal compositions, poems about his performances, letters declaring love or admiration. He didn't have time for any of it. But something in the woman's eyes stopped him. They were filled with desperate urgency, not the usual fan worship, but something deeper, something that looked like pain mixed with hope. "My grandmother," the woman continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "She recorded this in 1943. I have searched for someone who might understand it. Please, just listen." Victor took the USB drive, more to end the interaction than anything else. The woman's hand touched his briefly as she passed it over. Her skin was paper thin and cold. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Before Victor could say anything, she turned and walked away, moving slowly toward the exit. He watched her go, then looked down at the small device in his palm. His assistant was already approaching with his coat, ready to escort him to the car. Victor slipped the USB drive into his pocket and forgot about it. The hotel room was exactly like every other luxury hotel room he had stayed, in clean, modern, impersonal. Victor ordered room service, took his shower, and poured his wine. He should have been tired, but he felt restless. The performance had gone well, but something about the evening felt incomplete. He opened his laptop to check emails. 300 unread messages. Most of them could wait. His manager had sent the schedule for next month. More concerts, more cities, more airports. Victor scrolled through it without really reading. His hand touched something in his robe pocket. The USB drive. He had transferred it when changing clothes without thinking about it. For a moment, Victor considered throwing it away. He had no reason to listen to it. It was probably some amateur recording, a family member playing piano badly, something the old woman treasured for sentimental reasons, but had no real musical value. But it was late. He wasn't tired, and something about the way that woman had looked at him wouldn't leave his mind. Victor plugged the USB drive into his laptop. There was only one file on it, an old audio format converted from something even older. The file name was simply Miriam1943.wave, and the date stamp showed it had been digitized in 2003. Victor clicked play. For the first few seconds, there was only crackling static. Poor quality. Ancient equipment. He was about to close it when the piano started. The sound quality was terrible. Hissing, popping, distorted. But underneath all that noise, there was music. Victor sat up straighter. The melody was simple at first. Just a few notes played slowly. Nothing technically impressive. Any beginner could play these notes. But something about the phrasing made Victor's chest feel tight. The melody continued, developing in unexpected ways. It didn't follow normal musical structures. It wasn't quite classical, wasn't quite folk, wasn't quite anything Victor could identify. The harmonies were strange but beautiful. The rhythm pushed and pulled against itself in ways that shouldn't work but somehow did. And the feeling. God, the feeling in this music. Victor had listened to thousands of recordings. He had analyzed performances by every great pianist in history. He had studied interpretation and style and technique until he could identify a performer within a few measures. But this was different. This was something he had never heard before. The piece lasted about 3 minutes. When it ended, Victor sat in complete silence staring at his laptop screen. Then he played it again and again. By the 4th time, Victor was leaning forward, his wine forgotten, his eyes closed. He was trying to understand what he was hearing. The notes themselves weren't complex. A decent amateur could play them, but the way they were played, the tiny variations in timing, the subtle shifts in dynamics, the emotional weight behind each phrase, it was unlike anything in his experience. Victor opened his eyes and grabbed a pen and paper. He started writing down the notes, transcribing as he listened. His years of training made this easy. He could identify every pitch, every interval, every chord, but writing it down didn't help him understand it. He played the recording 10 more times, filling 3 pages with musical notation. It was 2 in the morning. His flight to Vienna was at 9. He should sleep. Instead, Victor walked to the hotel's music room. Most luxury hotels in Europe had one, a small practice space with a decent piano for traveling musicians. He had used them occasionally, though he usually preferred to wait until he had access to better instruments. The hotel piano was a Yamaha upright. Not great, but good enough. Victor sat down and placed his transcription on the music stand. He positioned his hands over the keys. He played the first phrase. It sounded wrong. Mechanical. Empty. Victor frowned and tried again, adjusting his dynamics, trying to match what he had heard in the recording. But something was missing. The notes were correct, but the soul of the music wasn't there. He tried a third time, a fourth, a fifth. Each attempt felt worse than the last. The melody that had sounded so hauntingly beautiful in the recording became flat and lifeless under his fingers. Victor, who could play the most demanding pieces in the entire classical repertoire, couldn't capture the essence of this simple tune. For the first time in 20 years, Victor felt inadequate at the piano. He played it again, and again, and again. The hotel manager knocked on the door at 4 a.m, politely asking if he could perhaps practice at a more reasonable hour. Other guests were complaining. Victor apologized and returned to his room. But he didn't sleep. He sat with his laptop playing that crackling old recording over and over, trying to understand what made it so powerful. Who was Miriam? Why had she recorded this in 1943? What did she know that he didn't? By the time his assistant called to remind him about the flight, Victor had listened to the recording 47 times. He had memorized every note. He could hear it perfectly in his mind, but he still couldn't play it the way it was meant to be played, and that terrified him more than anything in his entire life. Victor canceled his Vienna concert, then the one in Berlin, then the entire tour. His manager called him 17 times in one day. Victor ignored every call, his inbox filled with angry messages from promoters, concerned notes from colleagues, confused questions from journalists. He didn't read any of them. He sat at his Steinway for hours playing those same 32 bars over and over. The melody that had obsessed him since Prague. The tune that wouldn't leave his mind. His apartment, usually so neat and organized, became cluttered with sheet music. He had written out the melody in different keys, different time signatures, different arrangements. None of them captured what he heard in that old recording. None of them had that feeling. The notes were simple. A child could play them. That was what made it so maddening. Victor had conquered Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto, one of the most technically demanding pieces ever written. He had played Ravel's Gaspard de la Nuit, which had destroyed the confidence of countless pianists. He had mastered pieces that required fingers to move faster than seemed humanly possible. But this simple melody defeated him completely. He played it again. His fingers moved across the keys mechanically, hitting every note exactly right. Perfect timing. Perfect dynamics. Technically flawless and completely soulless. Victor slammed his hands down on the keys in frustration. The harsh chord echoed through his empty apartment. He stood up, paced to the window, stared out at the Vienna skyline. It was 3 p.m. He had been playing since 6 a.m. He couldn't remember if he had eaten breakfast. His phone buzzed. His partner, ex-partner now technically. They had broken up 2 months ago, but she still checked on him occasionally. "Are you okay? I saw you canceled your concerts." Victor typed back, "I'm fine. Working on something. You're always working on something. That was our problem." He didn't respond. She was right, but that didn't change anything. He set the phone down and returned to the piano. This time he tried playing it slower, really focusing on each note. Trying to feel something. Trying to find whatever that woman named Miriam had found in 1943. Nothing. It still sounded empty. Victor had spent his entire life believing that music was about technical perfection. Play the right notes at the right time with the right dynamics, and the emotion would follow automatically. It was a formula. A science. He had been the best in the world at this science. But now he was starting to suspect he had been wrong about everything. He grabbed his laptop and played the original recording again. That crackling, distant sound of a piano from 80 years ago. He closed his eyes and listened. There was something in those imperfect notes. Something in the way Miriam played that defied explanation. She wasn't trying to be technically perfect. Some notes were held a fraction too long. Some were slightly softer than they should be. By Victor's usual standards, it was full of tiny mistakes. But those mistakes made it human. Made it real. Made it hurt in a way that perfect technique never could. Victor opened his eyes and stared at his hands. These hands had won every competition. Had earned millions. Had been photographed and analyzed and praised by experts around the world. And they couldn't play 32 simple bars of music the way they were meant to be played. Days blurred together. Victor stopped answering his phone completely. His manager showed up at his apartment, pounding on the door, demanding to know what was happening. Victor shouted through the door that he needed time, just time. The manager left, threatening legal action for the canceled concerts. Victor didn't care. Money meant nothing. Reputation meant nothing. Only this melody mattered. He started researching. Who was Miriam? Where did this recording come from? He sent the audio file to musicologists asking if they recognized the composition. None of them did. He posted in online forums for classical music scholars. No one had heard it before. He even hired a professional researcher to dig through archives looking for any composer or piece that matched. Nothing. The melody was a ghost, beautiful and haunting and completely unknown. Victor's practice routine became obsessive. He would wake up and go straight to the piano, play the melody 20 times, rest, play it 20 more times. He stopped eating regular meals, just grabbed whatever was in the kitchen when his stomach hurt too much to ignore. He stopped showering daily. His hair grew longer than he had ever let it grow. His usual neat appearance became disheveled. Friends who managed to reach him on the phone were shocked by how he sounded. Scattered, confused, obsessed. They suggested he take a break, maybe see someone professional, talk to a therapist, get some rest. Victor told them they didn't understand and hung up. His ex-partner came by one evening, genuinely worried. She had a key and let herself in. She found Victor at the piano, of course, playing the same melody he had been playing for weeks. "Victor, what is happening to you?" He looked up at her. His eyes were red. He had dark circles underneath them. "I need to understand this piece." "What piece?" "I've never heard it before." "Exactly. Nobody has. It's from 1943. A woman named Miriam recorded it, and I can't play it right. I can't make it sound the way it should sound." His ex-partner sat down on the couch, genuinely concerned now. "You're scaring me. You look terrible. When did you last sleep properly?" "I don't know. Tuesday, maybe?" "It's Friday." Victor turned back to the piano. "I need to figure this out. You're one of the best pianists in the world. If you can't play it, maybe it's not meant to be played." "No." Victor's voice was sharp. "That's not it. I can play the notes. Any beginner could play these notes. But there's something else, something I'm missing, something I've always been missing." His ex-partner stayed for an hour, trying to convince him to rest, to eat something proper, to step away from the piano. Victor nodded along, but she could tell he wasn't really listening. After she left, he went right back to practicing. The pain started in his hands during the third week. A dull ache at first, then sharper. His fingers were overworked, strained from hours of repetitive practice. Any sensible musician would have stopped immediately. Hand injuries could end careers. Victor kept playing. He tried different approaches. Playing it angry, playing it sad, playing it with joy, playing it with desperation. None of it worked. The melody remained stubbornly out of reach, like trying to grab smoke. He started talking to himself while he practiced. "What am I missing? What did you know, Miriam? What did you understand?" His apartment became a prison. He rarely left. Groceries were delivered. Bills piled up on the counter unpaid. His manager stopped calling. Friends stopped texting. The silence around him grew deeper, broken only by the same 32 bars of music playing over and over. One night, Victor woke up at 2 a.m. and found himself at the piano. He had no memory of getting out of bed. His fingers were moving across the keys, playing Miriam's melody. He was sleepwalking, and even in his sleep he was practicing. That scared him. For just a moment, clarity broke through the obsession. He looked around his apartment, saw the mess, saw the sheets of music scattered everywhere, saw his reflection in the window. He looked like someone he didn't recognize, wild, broken, lost. But then he thought about that recording, about the way it made him feel, about the mystery of it, and he went back to practicing. The old woman had given him the USB drive with a keychain photograph. Victor found it in his jacket pocket. He stared at the faded image. A young woman at a piano. Miriam, probably. She looked happy in the photo. It must have been taken before 1943. Before whatever had happened to make her record that melody. What had she gone through? What had she experienced that allowed her to play with such depth? Victor realized somewhere in his exhausted mind that he was chasing something he might never catch. That maybe some music required more than technical skill. Maybe it required living through something, surviving something, understanding something about life that couldn't be learned at a conservatory or practiced for 6 hours a day. But he couldn't stop trying. He sat down at the piano again and played those 32 bars one more time, still wrong, still empty, but he would keep trying, even if it destroyed him. Victor stared at the photograph on the keychain for the 100th time. The young woman at the piano, Miriam. He needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to him. Finding the elderly woman who had given him the USB drive wasn't easy. He didn't know her name, didn't have her contact information. All he remembered was her face and that she lived somewhere in Prague. He flew back to the Czech Republic on a Tuesday morning, his first trip outside his apartment in nearly a month. The airport felt overwhelming after so long in isolation. Too many people, too much noise. Everything moved too fast. In Prague, Victor contacted the concert hall where he had performed. He explained to the staff that an elderly woman had approached him after the show, and he needed to find her. They looked at him with concern. His appearance had changed drastically. Unshaven, disheveled clothes, dark circles under his eyes. He didn't look like the polished performer they remembered, but his name still carried weight. They checked their records, called the volunteer coordinators who had worked that night. Finally, someone remembered. An older woman who had specifically requested to wait backstage. She had given her name for security clearance, Elena Strauss, an address in Prague's Old Quarter. Victor took a taxi through narrow cobblestone streets. The buildings here were centuries old, painted in faded yellows and oranges. Tourists walked past with cameras, but Victor barely noticed them. His mind was focused entirely on what he might learn. The address led to a modest apartment building, 4 stories with shutters that needed paint and flower boxes in the windows. Victor climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. His hands shook as he knocked on door number 12. The woman who answered looked surprised, then cautiously pleased. She was the same elderly lady from the concert hall. "Elena, you listened," she said softly. "You actually listened to it?" "I need to know everything," Victor said. His voice cracked. Please, I need to understand." Elena studied his face for a long moment, then stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was small and filled with old furniture. Photographs covered every surface. Black and white images from decades past, family photos, wedding pictures, children growing up, and several photographs of a woman at a piano. The same woman from the keychain. Elena made tea with trembling hands. Victor sat on a worn couch, feeling like he might break apart if she didn't start talking soon. Her name was Miriam Strauss, Elena began, settling into a chair across from him. "My grandmother. She was a brilliant pianist. Not famous like you, but very talented. She taught music in Prague before the war." Victor leaned forward. "The war?" "World War II. Elena's voice became quieter. "In 1942, my grandmother and her family were forced from their home. They were Jewish. The Nazis were taking Jewish people from all over Czechoslovakia. My grandmother, her husband, and their young daughter were sent to Theresienstadt." Victor knew about Theresienstadt. It was a concentration camp about 40 miles from Prague. The Nazis had used it for propaganda, calling it a model Jewish settlement. But it was a lie. Thousands died there from disease, starvation, and deportation to death camps. My grandmother's husband and daughter died within the first year. Elena continued. Typhus took them both within days of each other. Miriam survived barely. She weighed less than 90 pounds when the camp was liberated in 1945. The room felt too quiet. Victor could hear his own breathing loud in his ears, but the music, Elena said. She found the music during the darkest time. There was a piano in the camp, hidden in a basement storage room. Most people didn't know about it, but Miriam found it. The strings were broken. The keys stuck, but it still made sound. Elena stood and retrieved a worn notebook from a shelf. She handed it to Victor with careful reverence. "This is her diary. From the camp." Victor opened it with shaking hands. The handwriting was small and cramped, written in Czech. Elena translated as he turned the pages. She wrote about playing the piano at night, when the guards were less vigilant. Other prisoners would sneak down to listen, just a few at a time because getting caught could mean death. But they came anyway. They needed something beautiful in that place of horror. He couldn't understand the words. He could see the emotion in the handwriting itself. Some passages were calm and neat. Others were barely legible, written with obvious distress. The melody, Victor whispered. When did she compose it? She didn't compose it in the usual way, Elena explained. She said it came to her in pieces, in moments between the suffering. She would see something, a sunset through the barbed wire, a flower growing between stones in the yard, two prisoners sharing their small ration of bread. These small, beautiful moments in the midst of hell. She put them into music. Elena turned to a specific page in the diary. She wrote here, I play not to escape this place, but to remember why life matters. Each note is a reason to survive. Each phrase is a prayer for those who cannot pray anymore. Victor felt tears running down his face. He didn't bother wiping them away. She memorized the entire piece, Elena continued. Never wrote it down. Couldn't risk it. If the guards found written music, they would destroy it. So she kept it in. Her mind played it dozens of times for the other prisoners. They called it Miriam's Hope. That's what they named it, those people who listened in that basement. And after the war? Victor asked. Elena's face grew even sadder. After liberation, my grandmother was broken. Not just physically, though she never fully recovered her health, but emotionally, spiritually. She recorded the melody just once in 1946. A friend who survived with her had a recording device. Very primitive. That's the file I gave you. After that, my grandmother never played piano again. Never? Never. She said the music had saved her in that place, but she couldn't bear to touch a piano anymore. Too many memories. Too much pain. She married again, had children, including my mother. But she never spoke about the camps. Never discussed what happened. The only thing she left behind was that recording and this diary. Victor looked at the photographs on the walls. Miriam in later years. An older woman with sad eyes and a gentle smile, surrounded by family, but carrying something heavy inside that never quite left. Why give the recording to me? Victor asked. Why after all these years? Elena took a sip of her tea. I've carried this for 20 years since my grandmother died. I wanted someone to hear it who would understand the music itself. Not just the story behind it, but the actual beauty of what she created. I saw you perform and thought maybe you could be that person. Was I wrong? Victor thought about the past month. His obsession, his breakdown, his inability to capture what Miriam had created. I can play the notes, he said quietly. But I can't play it the way she did. I don't understand how. I've been trying for weeks and I can't get it right. Elena nodded slowly. My grandmother wrote something near the end of her diary. After liberation, after she was recovering, she wrote, "The music came from a place beyond technique. It came from understanding that beauty and horror can exist in the same moment. That hope and despair are not opposites but companions. You cannot play this music without understanding what it means to lose everything and still choose to create something rather than destroy." Victor closed his eyes. He thought about his life, his comfortable childhood, his easy success, his accumulation of awards and money and fame. He had never struggled, never really suffered, never faced anything that required him to find hope in hopelessness. "I've lived a privileged life," he said softly. "I've never experienced anything close to what your grandmother went through." "No," Elena agreed. "But suffering isn't the only teacher. My grandmother also wrote that beauty recognizes beauty. That maybe someone who truly loves music could learn to understand without living through the same pain. She believed that empathy and humility could open doors that technique alone never could." Victor sat with those words. Empathy and humility. Two things he had never prioritized. His entire career had been built on superiority, on being better than everyone else. He had viewed music as a competition he was winning. Elena made more tea. They sat together for hours as she shared more stories. About Miriam's life before the war, about her teaching style, about how she had helped other people in the camp, sharing her tiny food rations, caring for sick prisoners, organizing the secret concerts that gave people a reason to survive another day. She played for others, Elena said. Not for recognition, not for awards. She played because it was the most meaningful thing she could give in a place where everything had been taken away. As the afternoon sun began to fade, Victor asked the question that had been building in his mind. "May I borrow her diary? I promise I'll return it. I just need to understand her better." Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Take it. Maybe it will help you find what you're looking for." Victor left her apartment as evening settled over Prague. He carried the diary carefully like it was made of glass. Inside was a woman's testimony of surviving hell and still choosing to create beauty. And maybe, just maybe, it held the key to understanding what his music had been missing all along. Victor didn't touch a piano for 3 months. He returned to Vienna with Miriam's diary and read it cover to cover, then read it again and again. Each time he discovered something new, small details about her life, observations about the other prisoners, moments of hope written in the margins, moments of despair that made his heart ache. But he didn't play. Not a single note. Instead, he did something he had never done before. He started paying attention to the world outside his music. He volunteered at a hospital visiting patients who had no family. He would sit with them for hours, just listening to their stories. An old man who had survived cancer 3 times, a middle-aged woman recovering from a car accident that killed her daughter, a teenager dealing with depression so deep she couldn't see a future. Victor listened, really listened, not thinking about himself or his music, just being present with their pain. He started helping at a soup kitchen on Tuesday evenings, serving meals to homeless people. At first, he felt awkward and out of place. These weren't concert halls or luxury hotels, but slowly he began to see the people there as individuals with their own stories. A former teacher who lost everything to addiction, a veteran who couldn't adjust to civilian life, a single mother whose minimum wage job wasn't enough to pay rent. One night, a man recognized him. "Hey, you're that famous piano player. What are you doing here?" Victor paused, holding a ladle of soup. "Learning," he said simply. He reconnected with his sister. They hadn't spoken properly in 5 years. She lived 3 hours away and struggled with alcohol addiction. Victor had always been too busy, too focused on his career to deal with her problems. Now he drove to see her every week. They talked about their childhood, about their parents who had died years ago, about the pain she carried that she tried to drown with drinking. "I never understood you," she told him during one visit. "You were always so perfect, so successful. I felt like a failure next to you." "I wasn't perfect," Victor said quietly. "I was just good at one thing and terrible at being human." His ex-partner was surprised when he called and asked to meet for coffee. No agenda, no attempt to get back together, just to apologize properly for how he had treated her during their relationship. "You made me feel invisible," she told him, "like I was just another accessory in your perfect life." "You were right to leave," Victor said. "I'm sorry I made you feel that way." They talked for 2 hours. It didn't fix anything, but it felt important. Acknowledging the hurt he had caused. Taking responsibility. Victor spent his evenings reading Miriam's diary and trying to understand her world. He visited libraries and read books about Theresienstadt, about the Holocaust, about the thousands of people who had suffered in ways he could barely comprehend. He watched documentaries, read survivor testimonies, visited memorials. Victor read along even though he wasn't trying to experience their pain. That would be impossible and disrespectful, but he was trying to understand it, to develop empathy for suffering that was outside his own comfortable experience. And slowly, something inside him began to change. The arrogance that had defined his career started to feel hollow. The belief that he was superior to other musicians seemed absurd now. He had been technically skilled, yes, but he had been emotionally empty, playing notes without understanding what music was really for. Music wasn't about proving you were the best. It wasn't about perfect technique or winning competitions or filling concert halls. Music was about connection, about expressing something true. about reaching across the gap between one human heart and another and saying, I see you. I feel this too. You're not alone. 4 months after visiting Elena in Prague, Victor finally sat down at his piano again. He didn't play Miriam's melody immediately. Instead, he played a simple Chopin nocturne, one he had performed 1,000 times. But this time he played it differently, not showing off his skill, not thinking about technical perfection, just trying to express the sadness and beauty that Chopin had written into those notes. When he finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. It had felt different. Still not perfect, but more honest, more real. Over the following weeks, Victor slowly rebuilt his relationship with the piano. He practiced daily, but not to maintain his superiority. He practiced to explore, to discover, to understand music in a new way. He started teaching, not at prestigious conservatories, but at community centers, working with kids who couldn't afford expensive lessons. Some had talent, others didn't, but Victor found he enjoyed helping all of them, watching their faces light up when they learned a new piece, encouraging them when they struggled. One student, a 12-year-old girl from a difficult home situation, told him after a lesson, "Music is the only time I feel peaceful." Victor understood that now. Finally. 6 months after leaving Elena's apartment, Victor received a call from a small charity that supported Holocaust education. They were organizing a memorial concert. Would he consider performing? The fee was tiny compared to what he used to charge. The venue seated only 200 people. It was nothing like the grand concert halls he had played in before. Victor said yes immediately. He spent 2 weeks preparing. Not just practicing, but thinking about what this performance meant, about the people who would be in the audience, survivors and their families, people honoring lost loved ones, people trying to ensure that history wasn't forgotten. He would play several pieces, works by composers who had perished in the Holocaust, music that had been written in camps, songs of loss and remembrance, and he would end with Miriam's melody, the piece that had broken him down and rebuilt him into someone different. The night of the concert, Victor arrived early. The venue was simple, a small theater with wooden seats and plain walls. No luxury, no glamour, just a space for music and memory. The audience filled in slowly. Elderly people with numbers tattooed on their arms, middle-aged children of survivors, young people there to learn and remember. Victor watched them from backstage and felt the weight of what he was about to do. When he walked onto the stage, there was polite applause. Some people recognized him. Others didn't. It didn't matter. Victor sat at the piano, an old instrument not particularly special, but it was tuned well and had a warm sound. He played for 90 minutes, poured everything he had learned into the music, not technical perfection, though his years of training were still there, but something deeper, an understanding of why these notes mattered, why this music needed to be heard. When he finally reached the last piece, he paused, looked out at the audience. This melody was composed by Miriam Strauss in Theresienstadt concentration camp during 1943, he said. His voice was quiet but clear. She played it for other prisoners in secret concerts. She called it a prayer for those who could no longer pray. I learned about it from her granddaughter, and it taught me everything I had been missing about music. Victor placed his hands on the keys, and he played. It wasn't perfect. His fingers still couldn't capture every nuance of that old recording. He would never play it exactly the way Miriam had played it, because he hadn't lived her life or carried her pain. But this time, it meant something. This time, he played with humility, with empathy, with understanding that music was bigger than his own ego, that these 32 bars carried the weight of human suffering and human hope. And his job wasn't to show off his skill, but to honor what Miriam had created. When the last note faded, the room stayed silent for several seconds. Then someone in the front row began to cry, quiet at first, then deeper. Others joined. Not sad crying exactly, something more complex. Relief and pain and memory all mixed together. The applause when it came was different from any Victor had received before. Not the thunderous ovation of impressed audiences, but something more intimate, more genuine. People weren't applauding his talent. They were thanking him for honoring a story that mattered. After the concert, people came up to speak with him. An elderly woman touched his hand and said, "My mother was in Theresienstadt. She told me about secret concerts. Maybe she heard this melody, A middle-aged man said, "Thank you for remembering them, for keeping their music alive." Victor felt tears on his face and didn't try to hide them. Elena was there in the back row. She approached him last after most people had left. "My grandmother would have been proud," she said simply. Victor hugged her. "Thank you for trusting me with her story." Later that night, Victor sat in his apartment and looked at all his old awards and trophies. The proof of his former greatness. They felt like artifacts from someone else's life. He didn't throw them away. They were part of his journey. But they weren't what defined him anymore. The next morning, he started making plans. He would continue teaching. Continue performing, but in smaller venues for people who truly needed music. He would tell Miriam's story wherever he went. Make sure her melody wasn't forgotten. He would never claim to be the best pianist alive again. That title felt meaningless now. Instead, Victor had learned something more valuable. That true mastery wasn't about technical perfection. It was about understanding what you had lived, what you had learned, and what you chose to give back to the world through your art. He sat at his piano and played Miriam's melody one more time. Still not perfect. Still missing something that only she could have given it, but honest. Finally, completely honest, and that was enough.